Grace and peace be with you on this day. I extend at this point a warm welcome to our online community, people who are worshiping from home and are tuning in at this moment from the comfort of their living room with a cup of coffee in their hand. I noticed after COVID, after the pandemic, that more and more people were entering this worship space with a cup of coffee in their hand. And I want to let you know, for all those who were here, that you can do that. You could do that. Now, just watch. Everyone's going to get up and go get a cup of coffee. But it is a place where we want you to feel safe and to feel comfortable at, and to be with you, because it matters to us. Having read this passage, and you now have read my sermon title, I have to ask, what do we place first in our lives? Is it a matter of talk, of public testimony, or is it a matter of living? How do our lives reflect our commitment? A lifetime ago, I was a middle school teacher. I taught English and math to 7th graders. It was an interesting phase of my life. I recognize now, 35 years later, that I was still very much in development. It is a time of my life that I think back with joy. I really, really enjoyed those years of teaching. And believe it or not, some of those students still keep in contact with me. But I was still very much becoming the man that I intended to be. I was still very much becoming the man that God intended me to be. And it was during that phase of my life when a fellow teacher, Mr. Garcia, became very friendly towards me. The guy was a hoot, and I really, really enjoyed his company. And one Sunday he called me and he said that he wanted to talk. So I told him, come on over, and he came over to my house, and I still have this very vivid memory of him sitting in my living room. And he walked in with a satchel and, other materials and so forth, and I was wondering, what's all this stuff that he's bringing in with him? Well, to make a long story short, Mr. Garcia was selling Amway. And he asked me to join his team. And he was praising me up and down, telling me what a wonderful addition I would be to his team at Amway. And it turns out that I realized at that moment that he wasn't interested in my friendship at all. He was only interested in my sales potential. So I turned him down. And when I turned him down, wouldn't you know it, that Mr. Garcia stopped being friendly to me. As a matter of fact, it was even worse than that. I was no longer visible to him. There were times that our paths were crossed, we were in the same room, and it was as if he didn't even see me. I wasn't even there. We've all been there. We've all seen that happen. Sometimes it's happened to us. And I learned something about him that day. I learned that he made and kept relationships based upon the relationship's potential to make money for him. It was his commitment. It was his focus. Back then, I didn't know how to eloquently describe what I was turning down, but now that I'm a bit older and a bit wiser, I could say that I was choosing a different focus for my life, one that would eventually lead me to answer God's call into the ministry, because it actually wasn't very much later after that exchange with Mr. Garcia that I started to attend the seminary. And so the question has to be asked once again, what do we place first in our lives? How do our lives reflect our commitments? We have to be clear about where our commitment is, because there are forces at work constantly trying to get us to make a new commitment, one that would redirect our focus. They are trying very hard to get our attention, to the point that the economists nowadays have created a new category. It's a category called attention economy. Let me give you an example about attention economy. Have you ever visited a grocery store and been stopped dead in your tracks by a headline? Here's the scene. You're at the checkout line, and the person ahead of you is just taking forever. I mean, like forever. And you want to be patient, but your patience is just running out. So what do? Your eyes wander from that person that is taking forever, and you start looking at the magazines. You start looking at the tabloids. And in that rack that is holding those publications, suddenly a headline just grabs your attention. It leaps out at you. You know the kind. The one that's got a photoshopped picture of a famous person, Oprah or somebody, caught in something embarrassing. And it's actually so poorly done that from a distance you could tell that it's a Photoshop. But yet, you look at it and you go, could it be true? And in that fraction of a second, there's an urge that arises to pick up the magazine. Even though you never really read those magazines, even though you know that you are being manipulated by a cheap Photoshop, you can't stop yourself from picking up the magazine and taking a quick look inside. Now, this type of manipulation has been around for a very long time. It's nothing new. But it is now on the internet also. And you might be on the internet playing your favorite game, or maybe in the midst of a search for something, when all of a sudden a headline pops up. It could be maybe on the side margin and they're constantly scrolling, or maybe it's pictures. I know it's happened to me. It's happened to me quite a bit of times because I spent a good portion of my day on the internet. And not too long ago, I was there doing a search, and this headline came out that said, "You wouldn't believe how many children Burt Reynolds has fathered." And now I'm wondering, how many children did Burt Reynolds father? And it's a useless fact or trivia. It may not even be true, but it's got my attention. And I realize I'm being manipulated. I'm being distracted from what I really have to do. And there's a struggle there. My hand wants to go and find out, how many children did Burt Reynolds father? I know that if I looked like Burt Reynolds, I would have fathered a lot. But I go ahead and I'm strong and I don't go there. But wouldn't you know it that days later I find myself typing into Google and asking the question, how many children did Burt Reynolds father? Well, if you want to know, you're going to have to ask. It all depends who you ask. We can't ask Burt Reynolds anymore. Well, the thing is that our current global media makes money by stealing our attention. Those things happen because somebody's making money from that. They want our attention, especially when we're browsing the internet. And they generate these headlines. Sometimes they're scandalous. Sometimes they are upsetting. Most often, these are headlines that would gravitate and push you towards an emotional response in hopes that we will move our cursor and click on it. And as a matter of fact, there's another term for that. The kids nowadays, they call it clickbait. Clickbait is when something pops up on the computer and it's bait for you to go ahead and move your cursor and click on it. And the moment you click on it, it will send you down this rabbit hole of thing after thing after thing, and announcement after announcement, advertisement after advertisement, and before you know it, you are no longer at the task that you were set out to do before. Clickbait has headlines that often produce anxiety, because often clickbait has images or words or so forth that make us think that our world is falling apart. And why do these media companies do this? Well, they do it because They want our money. We are exposed to headlines about our political system falling apart, militia groups, hate groups, and how they're infiltrating the government and our school boards, about Russian spies, domestic terrorism, pedophile rings hiding in plain sight, rising temperatures, rising waters, gun violence, school violence, racial violence, conspiracy theories of any kind, and the list goes on and on and on. Often, algorithms have been created so that they can figure out what is the bait that you're most likely to click on. For those of us who hate a certain type of person, then it's all of a sudden all kinds of stuff about this person. For those of us who love this type of person, then it's all sorts of information about that person or that type of person. Not too long ago, I had a group of people at my house, and they all wanted to eat Mexican. So I went into my computer and tried to find out if Red Mesa Mexican restaurant was open. Wouldn't you know it, that 2 days later, I'm getting all sorts of advertisement about Mexican food and how to make my favorite guacamole. And it's all because I typed in the words Mexican restaurant 2 days earlier. Somebody is making money off of my search. The downside to all this, the downside to all this information coming on our screens is that it's too much. It's just way too much. And eventually we become numb to the headlines and we stop paying attention. Eventually we think that all of it is fake, that all of it is garbage, that none of it deserves our attention. And we stop paying attention to what is happening around us. Because for our own sanity, we allow apathy to enter into our heart, mind, and soul. It's almost like a matter of survival. We have to disconnect from it all. But because so many of us have to be on the computer, what ends up happening is that we don't pay attention to any of it. And this is why I think church is becoming more important than ever. In our generation, in this 21st century, church is the antidote to attention economy or clickbait. Because church gives us a community and a path for positive headlines and for positive narratives. Church gives us the vehicle for hope in our lives, hope that is actually tangible, that is real. Like the good friends who come to church every Sunday and sit together in the same pew and for years become the support group for each other in a world that otherwise may have forgotten about them. Like the woman who thought that a mission trip to Kentucky was important and that it would cost money. And so a fundraiser was created and she pulled in 12 people to create Cabaret Night. Kudos to Gail Murphy. Like the many people who think that they don't belong because the world has called them misfit and the world continues to treat them as such. And yet they find their way here so that somebody might tell them, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcomed here. Like the many people who want to be part of something larger, and they know that they're doing a very small contribution, like organizing shirts on a rack of a thrift store in the most southern tip of St. Pete Beach. But that small effort is part of a larger contribution to changing the world. Like the many people who somehow see the good in others, despite the many flaws that might be blatant. Like the many people who see the good in the conflicts that might be arising. And like the many people who believe that God uses all facets of life, all crises, and all problems to bring out the best in us. For you see, it's a matter of focus. It's a matter of priority. That we might find ourselves in a difficult situation, we might find ourselves in a disagreement, but somehow or another, to turn it around so that we could build on it. And so consequently, I have to ask you for the third time, what do we place first in our lives? How do our lives reflect our commitment? Spiritual teachers seem to understand that what we feed influences. And after enough time of feeding those influences, our being changes. We become what we feed. We become those influences. So consequently, the best spiritual teachers spend most of their time helping us redirect our focus. And so I'm going to go to the gospel. And Jesus saying, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet God feeds them. In other words, Jesus is saying, look at the abundance of our life and not the scarcity. Look at everything that we enjoy and not what has been taken from us. There was once an unhappy apprentice who came to his master and told the master that he was deeply saddened by life and that he needed to hear a solution. He needed to hear something that would help him not be sad by everything that was happening in life. And the master instructed the unhappy apprentice to put a handful of salt in a glass of water and then to drink it. And then he asked the apprentice, how does it taste? Terrible! Ugh! Said the apprentice. And the master nodded. And then he asked the apprentice to take another handful of salt and to follow him over to the lake. And there they walked in silence up to the lake, and he told the apprentice to take that handful of salt and put it in the waters of the lake. And so consequently, the apprentice did that. He swirled his handful of salt into the lake, and then the master said, okay, now, drink. And so the apprentice cupped his hands and he drank water from that lake. And the master asked him, how does it taste? He said, it tastes good. It's good lake water. And the master said, do you taste the salt? And the apprentice smiled and said, no. So the master sat with his troubled apprentice and he took him by the hands. And he said, the pain of life is the salt, no more, no less. We cannot lie to ourselves and think that there are different kinds of pain. We cannot graduate the pain and say that some pain is more painful than others. Pain is pain, and it's all the same. What changes is the vessel that we pour it into. The amount of pain we feel depends on the container that holds the pain. So when you are in pain, young apprentice, the wisest thing to do is to enlarge your sense of being, to enlarge your view. Stop being a glass and become a lake. Jesus is asking us to give a 100% commitment to Him. And in this passage, Jesus goes ahead and he talks about the person who wants to build a tower and how the person goes and prepares the soil and makes his studies and does his math. I have to tell you, this really quite resonated for me. Because before that builder can commit to the project, the builder had to study. And I, as a pastor, taking a group of 30 people to Kentucky, before I could say, yeah, we'll go and help out, I had to go. I had to go and I had to meet the people. I had to walk the streets of Mayfield, and I had to kind of figure out, is this a mission that our church should give a 100% commitment to? And this is something that we could all resonate. We've all been there. Think of the young woman considering if she's ready for motherhood. Should she be a mom now or should she wait? Think of the young couple being presented with the opportunity to buy a house. Are they ready to own a mortgage or should they wait? Think of somebody going off to college and assessing, am I mature enough for the task on hand? Think of the person who's relocating from one city to the other and then taking stock of what they own, what they would sell, and where they will go, and if it's going to be worth it. Consider the person who has to switch jobs. Consider the individual who's going to move from one corporate position to another. They all have to make an assessment. But at one point or another, they have to make a decision, and they have to jump in. They have to jump in, both feet in. There is no way of doing anything in life half-heartedly. The half-hearted person ends up failing at two fronts. And that is why Jesus is asking for a 100% commitment. He says, yes, you're going to have to be like the builder or like the king, and you're going to have to make your assessment. You're going to have to plan. But I want you all the way in. Because when we pursue a relationship with God, and when we turn our lives over to God, there is a visible outcome. And we may not do this because of the outcome, but it is an outcome that everybody else could see. It's an outcome that is seen in people whose lives reflect a deep faith. This is the outcome of deepened awareness. When we turn our lives over to God 100%, we become aware to a higher degree of our own spiritual essence and of that spirit that moves between us and among us, that sometimes gets us to go to faraway places and make a difference in the lives of other people. When we turn our lives over to God, we understand that all struggle and all pain is momentary. We then release our suffering into the hands of God, and by so doing, the suffering is dissolved into the lake of sacred love. To hold on to pain is to concentrate the suffering and therefore shrink our awareness. So Jesus is calling us to be more than just followers. Jesus is calling us to commit, to be all in. He doesn't want a half-hearted commitment, because if we're not fully committed, we won't be able to love our neighbor fully. Just think about it. Think about love and what love requires. We either love all the way or we don't. We either surrender our pain to God or we hold on to them. We either forgive all the way or we don't. There is no half-hearted forgiveness. There is no half-hearted following of Jesus. If we do have this half-heartedness with it, we might as well not say anything at all. If you don't mean it, don't say it. If you don't mean it, don't even try to do it. We either welcome people into this house and mean it, or we might as well not say anything at all. It has become our weekly mantra. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And we mean it all the way through. Now, I have to tell you that, like you, I'm surrounded by cynics. And the cynics tend to come up to me with more frequency than they might come up to you. And they want to tell me things like, Guillermo, what you just said, it sounds really good from the pulpit, but that doesn't translate to real life. That doesn't translate to my office life or to my business life. And those voices sadden me, because these are individuals that at one point or another in their life were full of hope and promise, and they now are full of cynicism. These are voices that argue that the world is dog eat dog. And if you want to succeed in the business world, the stock market, politics, in any competitive sport, you have to leave all of this lovey-dovey gospel mumbo-jumbo Sunday morning at church. You can't take it with you. And I get it. I get it. Our world is full of people who want to do us harm. Our world is full of people who want to take what we own. People who want to push us around, make us feel weak and less worthy. I want to be clear at this moment. The gospel never says that we have to allow ourselves to be taken advantage of. To love our neighbor does not mean that I need to become a doormat. To love my neighbor does not mean that I have to constantly allow for them to do with me as they wish. Love of self is very important too. However, what the gospel does say is that there are people that take advantage of others, but we don't have to become one of them. We don't have to fall into that trap. We don't have to lower the bar on our Monday through Friday living. We have to continue throughout the week with the Christian values that we sang, we prayed, and that we heard, and that we repeat often in those churches that have creeds that are being said out loud. If we are to be all in, we treat our neighbors, our employees, our office staff, our competitors, we treat everybody, the lawn guy, the cafeteria worker, the CEO, the homeless person, in the same way that we would treat a loved one or a member of our church family. It has been said that we should live in such a way that if the Gospels were lost, they could be rewritten by looking at our lives. What does that mean? We are to embody the essence of the Gospels. And so here's my altar call to you. Let us recommit our lives to God right here, right now. Let us make a commitment to God in our lives. And not just now on Sunday mornings, but every day. Every morning when we wake up, let us turn to God in prayer and commit our lives to God on that day. And let us commit our lives in such a way that if this church, this beautiful church, built here on Pass-A-Grille Beach, if it were to be blown away by a hurricane, that people would still know about it by looking at our lives. Let us be that church. Let us be that commitment. Amen.